massive amounts of funds from China and Hong Kong. Connected to David Eby's advisor. My sources indicate, I'll say it on the record, this should be related to Chinese intelligence. Canadians can't trust the Hogue Commission, unfortunately.
This isn't just at the federal level, it's at all levels of government. Grassroots campaign to vote for the worst candidate, Chandra Arya.
Connections to India, connections to China. Look, this is not a joke, what's happening in Canada.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are really excited to bring you this interview. It's one of the main reasons we came to Ottawa outside of the prorogation hearings, as you may know. A lot of you have been suggesting that we follow Sam Cooper, read his book, get in touch with him, what have you. There's a reason why we haven't addressed any of those comments. It's because we already had an interest in talking to this individual because of his coverage. Many of you saw him at the press conference with Kevin Wong and Michelle Katsuya way back in the fall, where they talked about some of the possible names of the 11 of the parliamentarians, and we are so excited to talk to Sam about that, about the threat of the Trump tariffs, and maybe so much more as we dive into this. So, Sam, welcome to Northern Perspective.
It's great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Listen, there's so much going on right now, and it seems like every interview that we have, we've spoken to a former colonel of the Canadian military. We've spoken to Michelle Katsuya about his thoughts on foreign interference. We've digested a lot of your book, Willful Blindness, which for anyone who is watching, check it out. It will leave your jaw on the floor, no doubt. And I think a lot of Canadians just don't know really what is happening, I would say, behind the veil in Canada and how we got to this spot. And this all seemed to start with rumors of foreign interference from China a couple of years ago in Parliament. So you've been covering this much more before that came out. So maybe just talk us through, if you can, summarize how China really has become involved in Canada within the last 20 years. And I'm asking you to summarize a large portion of your book, I know that, but just for Canadians that don't have the background.
Yeah, it's helpful for me when I get a big sweeping question and a great question like that to think of my career. So I came up as a news reporter in Vancouver, and I was covering or really digging into how foreign money was influencing real estate prices. And I had discovered very clearly that it was massive amounts of funds from China and Hong Kong, and which didn't make a lot of great sense because, the Chinese communist economy and regime has strict controls. So there had to be something interesting or questionable about those massive flows of money. I discovered much of it was ultimately I discovered after years, it was related to very shadowy businessmen, purportedly businessmen, and then getting further into it, it was related to businessmen with links to organized crime, and yet also purportedly legitimate businesses in Canada. To get further, I found that these gentlemen involved in massive casino transactions were involved in underground banking. And this was a discovery of how money was flowing from China and Hong Kong underground into Canada. I ultimately linked it to the drug trade internationally. And my work led to an Australian professor actually designating this the Vancouver model of money laundering.
Yeah, and so it's not really good when we have our own model. So.
No, it's not what you want to be branded for. An international drug trafficking model based in Vancouver, how China floods money into west coast of Canada. And, that it's a little bit of a long way to get into. As I was making those discoveries, I was fascinated to the point of obsession when Richard Fadden, some of your viewers will remember, he made headlines around 2010. I believe it was at a defense conference. A CBC reporter heard Richard Fadden say, we have some concerns that we have politicians getting very close to China. And he didn't name them, but he pointed to British Columbia, where I was working as a young reporter, and Ontario. So that around 2010 to 2012, while I'm following the money trail of Vancouver real estate, I start trying to understand what was Richard Fadden talking about, and without rambling too much in this first answer, that's the history of how, ultimately I wrote a book that brought together those threads of international underground finance as it relates to China and drug trafficking, and political influence and foreign interference, and Canadian politicians getting too close to China was the other thread. I brought them together in my reporting around 2020, 21, and that's the same time that my book, Willful Blindness, brought those threads together. In really, I was a student of history at the University of Toronto. As I've said, I was interested in possibly going into law. Journalism brought those interests together. So I do think I wrote the book Willful Blindness with an understanding that I was living, in discovering what was happening in Canada, but having a historical perspective. And that brought us to, I'm happy to say that people in Canadian intelligence and other countries read my book. Some people in Canada, Canadian government arms, were so concerned about what was happening in our parliament that they came to me in very careful, clandestine ways that an intelligence operative would use and disclose this information, which really filled in blanks that I had already covered in my book. And that's how I broke the election interference story and scandal that has been covered by other media after I did at Global News. And it's a story that unfortunately is still, in my view, very much still covered up, even though we've had a foreign interference inquiry that just commenced.
One of the things that you cover in your book and how this really relates to what's happening down south is the Chinese were bringing in, I believe you said heroin, but also fentanyl. And for those interested, what the Chinese were doing is using these underground casinos to essentially launder their money. Money would go in, casino chips would come out, and there was also, never mind that, there was this other loan shark ring that was going on, where they would take people's houses, they would take people's cars, their furniture, and the other issue is Vancouver served as a main distribution hub for sending a lot of this stuff down to the States too, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I like to say it's incredibly simple in a way, and it gets incredibly complex. But, how the casinos fit into this is really around the world. They have, of course, we have Chinese diaspora communities. Great people, many that have fled that thuggish regime. But what has happened is that regime, in wanting to protect itself and its interests, has reached out around the world and placed essentially thugs within communities, or supported, domestic thugs within those communities. And it uses those gangsters, brands them as community leaders, and they're used to monitor the community. This has been happening for decades around the world, everywhere. But in cities like Vancouver and Toronto, with just like such a proportion of a immigrant diaspora from Asia, it has become institutionalized, where the communities have these underground banks and casinos run by these thugs with the connections to the communist regime. And so a model developed. This is the Vancouver model. If you were a gangster business person, anyone in China that wants to get around that capital export control, you make a deal with those gangsters. Let's just focus in Vancouver, the underground bankers. And you say, okay, I have $1 million of corruption money in Shanghai. I'm going to put that money into Gangster A's bank account in Wuhan, where they make a lot of fentanyl precursors. I'm going to travel to Vancouver, meet Gangster A's associate, outside the River Rock Richmond Casino. He's going to give me $1 million in cash, in a couple of suitcases. I'm going to walk in and gamble it, right? So I've done that underground transaction, and the gang gets a little bit of a fee. And it got so complex and institutionalized, the person wanting to get their funds out of China did not even have to put the money down in Wuhan in gangsters, fentanyl traffickers' bank account. They just make a deal on, encrypted WeChat text, which is a social media app controlled by Beijing. And they say, yeah, we've done business. I met you in a Macau casino where gambling is legal. I'm going to meet you in Vancouver. I want, some cash. So, okay, I'll give you $1 million. We have a relationship. Gangster's going to gamble in Vancouver and then pay back that loan, minus 2%, 5% in Wuhan. And so, again, drug cash is the loan in Vancouver from this transnational gang, and it's paid back in Wuhan. So that's that loop. And, as I say, you mentioned that these loans involve real estate. Yes, when you get that loan in Vancouver and you're going to pay back in Wuhan, it's secured by the gangsters with a lien against your home in Vancouver. So Vancouver, right across the city, just tremendous amounts of homes have these purported legal documents on them that are, it's a way to enforce the loan. And it could be on your Mercedes, and of course, there's a couple kinds of loaning going on. If you're a gangster and you got no problem paying back, okay, you might have a piece of paper with a 40% interest rate and never have to pay that. If you're a gambling addict in the diaspora and you have to pay that back, it's against your home, they'll take your home. They'll take your car. I researched cases in Canadian court files where they taped children. I'm sorry, I get a little emotional. They taped children to the wall and shot holes around them.
Oh,
right? So there's different types of lending going on. All of it's facilitating money going around the world. But there's also gambling addicts, and the community is being victimized by these big circle boys, which is the name of these transnational gangsters that have set up in Canada because we have weak laws.
So I don't want to get any further into that because I would give away a lot of the book, and people need to go and buy the book. But it was jarring when we were dissecting it, and just every page I found myself saying wow, 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 because this is all happening, I would say, under the nose of the Canadian public. Nobody knows that this is really going on, and This is going completely against the entire concept that the U.S. and other countries go by when it comes to foreign interference and foreign influence. Is you expose it, you shine a light on it, and so everyone understands that it's there, and that way the rats try and scurry and run away. So as it relates to our politicians, we interviewed with Michel and asked him about the 11 names, and then he made our jaws drop when he said, well, actually, it's more than 11. It's over 50. It's just the 11 are the recent ones. So
in the Toronto area.
Right.
Yeah.
So that shocked us. So at the press conference back in the fall, you talked about 4 or 5 potential people.
I can say those names again that I mentioned if we need to.
So why don't we just remind everybody who you surmise they are?
Yeah, to my memory, and this was carefully prepared, chronologically I detailed, starting with Premier David Eby and mentioning that a very key Beijing-friendly journalist by the name of Ding David Guo, who is David Eby's advisor, I had found in my research, both from open source records and diaspora sources, surprisingly, since David Eby is purportedly a left-wing, NDP politician, David Ding Guo had also been influential, I learned, in the conservative leadership race of Patrick Brown, which failed in 2022. Right. So I mentioned that. I then proceeded to say that my intelligence, which has proven 100% accurate, in all reviews that have followed. I named a number of names in reports, but I came out at that press conference and said I had not, at my previous media employer, Global News, named Minister Mary Ng. However, through multiple sources, that the ones that had read my book, Willful Blindness, and risked their careers to bring information to me over the past years, indicated that Mary Ng, a Markham area MP who replaced former Markham area MP John McCallum, was allegedly one of the Toronto area 11 candidates supported by clandestine Beijing influence networks in the 2019 federal election. And after getting that support, quickly became a cabinet minister for Prime Minister Trudeau. And so importantly, unlike others that I was told of, it was assessed, according to my information from sources, that Minister Ng would be classified as one of those candidates who was not witting of receiving this underground support from influence networks consistent of Chinese consulate officials in Toronto, staff members of various politicians are involved allegedly, so-called community leaders or community groups with proxies run by Beijing would be involved, and Canadian politicians. This is what's called the United Front clandestine networks. And so when we talk about 11 candidates, I did believe very important to say that my information, which has proven 100% accurate, pointed towards Minister Ng. And so I had tried various ways and times to reach her directly to ask her for comment, and I had sought comment through the Prime Minister's office and not received it. So after that press conference with Kevin Vuan, I did see that Minister Ng tweeted on X saying that, she was not involved in anything like this and never involved in any inappropriate activity. And she actually, I can remember her post said that, I'll say it because it's important, that I had been chased out of journalism, which is, listen, I'll say it now. Court records, people, if they want to dig, they can now confirm that I was offered a raise and offered a promotion by my former employer, but I chose to start up my independent
Reverse psychology.
So to Minister Ng, look, I'm not going to action that, but the truth is the truth.
Right.
Okay. So I guess one more important thing in that press conference, I was asked, Kevin Vuan claims, or he believes he has information indicating that Beijing targeted him as a Liberal candidate in 2021. And a journalist from National Post asked me, could Kevin Vuan be a victim? And it had come out during the Hogue Commission that there was an unidentified Liberal Party candidate that was targeted by an unidentified foreign state in 2021. And I said, well, based on what I know, and including, talking to Kevin Vuan, hearing from a Liberal Party source that claimed to have knowledge, I did say that it would fit if Kevin Vuan was the Liberal MP or candidate that was targeted by Beijing, and that smears made their way into Canadian journalism, involving allegations that against Mr. Vuan that were, dropped. So I do think it's important to say that I would assess a high probability without being able to say or confirm that Kevin Vuan was the victim. I do think it would fit that Kevin Vuan was attacked by Beijing and potentially by Canadian politicians who would have promised Beijing they would be there to attack any colleagues that were critical of Beijing.
Right.
So I think I've said enough, but I think there could be a case there. And again, the Hogue, Justice Hogue from Quebec, came out essentially and didn't say who the victim was there. So we've heard a lot, I think, about people claiming to be victims, in all this reporting. Here we have someone that, limited intelligence says was attacked by Beijing, like Kenny Chu could have lost their career, and yet we can't know who they are. If I was Mr. Buon, and somehow, let's say from the CIA or something, I got confirmation, I'm just speaking from my heart, maybe I would want to have a lawsuit against the Hogue Commission for not saying I'm the victim attacked by perhaps my former colleagues in Parliament if Mr. Vuan doesn't win re-election.
Well, especially since the position of the Trudeau government they've tried to revise history and saying, oh, well, whenever anyone is interfered with, we tell them, Michael Chong would beg to differ, Aaron O'Toole would beg to differ, Kenny Chu would beg to differ.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting that Mary Ng has said that she's not going to run in the next election. So that's
that interested me. I did note that with interest, as they say. Yeah.
So, and a couple other names came up in that press conference. I think Parm Baines, his name came up.
Yes.
And this is more related to the NSICOP report, I think, that people are interested in. So,
thanks for reminding me. Parm Baines, a very important case. I'll try not to expand too far here, but look, Kenny Chu was attacked in Richmond. The evidence in the Hogue Commission, whatever anyone's conclusion was, the evidence says that United Front networks that can have presidential level meetings in Beijing attacked and smeared Kenny Chu. I, for the Bureau, reported, based on open source records and what I believe to be an anonymous case cited in the NSI Cup report, wrote that, yes, we can see that Parm Baines, as a Liberal candidate, was interviewed by a Mandarin language station weeks or days before the 2021 election, was asked, what do you think of this bill introduced by your opponent, Kenny Chu? Mr. Baines, anyone can go to the video, I've posted it on my story, said, I find that a very discriminatory policy. I cannot support that.
You probably have heard the Bill C-282 that was proposed by Conservative MP Kenny Chu in the Parliament, called Foreign Influence Registration Act. This act is set to require any organization or individual that are controlled or influenced by foreign political organizations that require to register with the federal department. This act didn't point to any specific countries. What do you think this act will violate any human right of certain part of Canadian? And what's your thoughts? If you are elected as MP, will you support this bill?
The simple answer is I will not support that bill. I don't believe that I can support anything that is viewed to be discriminatory against any community.
So, essentially calling Kenny Chu racist, an Asian Canadian, racist against Chinese. Okay, so then that day, on that day, Mr. Baines gets an endorsement from this same entity. Now, let's connect at a dot, because I like to do this when I get a chance to speak at length. Said Mandarin language media entity connected to David Eby's advisor, David Ding Guo. My sources indicate, I'll say it on the record, this should be related to Chinese intelligence. Let's just put that out there. There's enough open source records. So it doesn't stop there. Mr. Parm Baines, a week later, shortly before the election, individuals that can be seen visually in meetings with Xi Jinping at the highest level presidential United Front Work Department meetings are there campaigning with Parm Baines and offering him support. So I say, this fits what I read in NSI Cop was there was a textbook case of foreign interference in which someone benefited, and I believe that report indicated it was wittingly benefited, right? So Mr. Baines says he didn't benefit from anything inappropriate, but extending it a little further here, I have noted and reported very recently for the Bureau that Parm Baines campaigning in Richmond with Mark Carney, the Liberal frontrunner, in that crowd is a high-level United Front official for the area. This is all open source record, and so it appears that we have a pattern here forming, leading right into the leadership contest for an election if it happens, this year.
100%. And for those wondering about the United Front reference, there is an organization called the United Front Work Department, and that is essentially the organization that reports directly into the Beijing government. For those that are wondering, so when Sam refers to a United Front type of operation, that's what we're talking about. So
yeah, very importantly, the documents that I read, to form my reporting in 2022 and 2023, and documents now disclosed in the Hogue Commission say that under Xi Jinping, the United Front ramped up to tens of thousands of cadres, and she elevated this United Front, which is called, in Chinese language documents, a magic weapon for the Chinese Communist Party to influence abroad. And as the CIA says, it's a high-level core entity of the party to exert control over the 1.4 billion masses in mainland China. 99% of which would not be, or more, not Chinese Communist Party members.
So let's talk about NSICOP. There was allegedly 11 total parliamentarians in there that are wittingly or unwittingly or semi-wittingly collaborating with foreign states against the interests of Canada. We've talked about one of them, Parm Baines. We've talked about a couple of them. Do you have any inkling on who the entire 11 are? And this is where it gets a little touchy, I know, because there's a question of evidence and there's a question of, there's other questions.
Yeah. So, to get back to it, my reporting for Global pointed to 11 in the Toronto area alone, and that's in 2019. These are candidates, 7 Liberal candidates, 4 Conservative. So in the Toronto area, and the document I read and reported upon was a Privy Council office document from the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat vetting 100 CSIS reports. So in terms of intelligence, it doesn't get more solid than that. We have 2 agencies and, a vetting and filtering process and a very limited statement I read. And so 11, some witting, some not witting. Marrying, being a minister, being extremely close to the inner power circle of the Trudeau government and office, having capacity to make appointments, judges, should be crown corporations, all kinds of, people that came to me and risked their careers and more felt it very important that marrying be named among those 11 and yet not among the witting. So other politicians in the network were named at this point because of something that I'm not happy, that I call lawfare activity, and really ongoing lawsuits that involve global news. I don't want to reiterate names that came out beyond that,
Right.
that global news is involved in, but my own work, continuing work, I've said, that's 11 in Toronto. Parm Baines is out in Vancouver.
Right.
Kenny Chu egregiously attacked. If there's anyone in Canada that would like to step forward and debate me and say Kenny Chu was not attacked by Beijing from the highest levels, words escape me of a type of person that would argue that. But Parm Baines very clearly benefited. Was he witting? Was he naive? Was he unwitting? Did monies flow that we haven't heard about? I'm not sure. But I do believe, very important to say, Mr. Baines was the winner. Kenny Chu was a loser. Parm Baines in Richmond and British Columbia, which is very, important if there's a close election, supporting leadership candidate Mark Carney. So I don't think anyone should lose sight that this is a very important case, whether Parm Baines was witting or not. Hey, look, Mark Carney is a smart person, reportedly. He wittingly is out there with Parm Baines campaigning. I'm witting that I can see a United Front Work Department operative posing with both of them. So let's focus on the future and what could be happening to this election. Beyond that, Michelle Junot-Katsia told you about, 50. Well, yes, I've reported that based on Chinese Communist Party documents that experts in the diaspora, could provide to me, and I could assess and go to Charles Burton, internationally respected sinologist and Mandarin reader, to read and assess the document. I reported for the Bureau that in 2019, 40 candidates were endorsed, with great vigor by the United Front Work Department entities, and I can read this in a document. So this fits with what I was told by a very important source, that 11 in Toronto is one number, but 40 to 50 should be the number of candidates supported by Beijing that some people of integrity in Canadian intelligence believe is the real figure, around 50 supported by China. That's what we should be afraid of in this coming election.
And the other disturbing thing is that that's just China. And there was other intelligence that was discussed in the Hogue Commission about potential MPs that are collaborating with India at the same time.
And one that's collaborating with two unidentified nations. So is that China and India? Is it China and Iran? I believe both. I agree. They could be both cases of those. And yes, India, Iran, other Middle Eastern nations will be in the mix.
Right.
Thuggish or authoritarian African states could be in the mix. So you're right. China, by far the biggest threat. And I think it's a good time because it's on my mind recently. I don't think, my sense is that the US and China, it appears, there's chances that we can see kinetic conflict, in the next, 1 to 5 years.
Yeah, there's a collision course there.
There's a collision course. I've traveled to Taiwan for reporting, not to get off track here, but I think what I want to say is there's a lot of discomfort with politics in North America going on right now and around the world, Ukraine, Russia. It seems to be driven by an American government. Whether you like it or not, they're focused on a collision course, and that's China. And that does feed into what we're talking about that election interference in Canada, that underground banking, that fentanyl flooding into Vancouver and into North America, all of the money being laundered in Vancouver and Toronto by these triad bosses that are victimizing the diaspora community. Again, I'm the type of person that I do get a bit emotional when I read documents that these big circle thugs tape children to walls and shoot holes around them. They kidnap children when there's a loan debt. And our government has let these people run wild in our communities. And indeed, as I continue to report for the Bureau, as I just believe it's so important, law enforcement in Canada and the United States is now on the record, with me saying we have concerns that the political class in Canada is very close and can be found in pictures close to senior Asian organized crime. So I covered a few bases there and circled back, but China, number one threat, India, Iran, yes, supporting politicians in Canada, other nations as well.
Well, and we've been seeing some, let's just say, some feedback on the Liberal leadership race, and online, especially on Twitter, is the main venue. There have been a lot of people that are aligned with the political right that are frustrated with the state of political state in Canada. Everyone believes that Mark Carney is the predetermined leader of the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
So there was this unofficial grassroots campaign to decide to vote for the worst candidate for the Liberal Party, and that was predetermined to be Chandra Arya when he was running.
Yeah.
Now, one of the
who, by the way, with Yuan Pao and Victor O, so we have a cross section of politicians. Open source records indicate supported by the United Front. Sorry to jump in, but
no,
yeah,
that is key.
The worst to the worst, possibly working with India. Open records show connections to India. I'm saying connections to China. So,
well, and this is why it's really relevant that you said that, because we had a lot of people asking us to support this campaign. We said we don't believe in doing that. We think it's not democratic to. Mm-hmm. I went so far as to call it domestic interference, because if you were actively joining a party just for the express reason of sabotaging a Liberal race.
Yeah, even if it's funny, it's not right.
Right. And I'd said to Michelle, I said, it's a good thing that he was eliminated, because we could have been in a situation that if this campaign was successful, it could have elected someone who's potentially collaborating with foreign nations as the Prime Minister of Canada.
Any number of problems could have stemmed from that, yeah.
Right. And sure, he would be only in for a couple of weeks until a confidence vote comes, but what is he going to be able to do in that couple of weeks? What information is he going to be able to potentially get access to and feed back to people in that couple of weeks?
And what disrepute to the Canadian state, which already is a bit of a laughingstock, and that's just becoming clear to Canadians, very sadly.
Right. Worldwide. So that's where I just became really angry, especially when I kind of corroborated some of that in the Hogue report with potentially Chandra Arya there. So this is the issue, because I think we can say China has a success story in sowing distrust in our democracy.
Yeah.
Along with potentially Russia at the same time.
Yeah.
I know they do a lot of social media interference as well.
There's a lot of monkeying going on in social media, yeah.
So now we're at a point where Canadians don't trust their government. They're now actively, in a way, working against democracy, and they're almost doing China's work for them. And people need to remember that China and Russia have not stopped. So there's a lot of weird things that are being stated on social media that now people, because they mistrust the government so much, they will just pick them up and broadcast it out to Canadians, so that Russia and China don't actually have to do that. They just have to put out a few little nuggets out there, and people think, hey, that's a good, crazy story. And now everyone believes it. So now we're in this situation leading into this next election. The Hogue Commission was supposed to put everybody at ease. And I think the Hogue Commission has just caused people to just say, nope, this is as corrupt as ever, because how can you have CSIS agents that are risking jail time, releasing information to different media outlets, Globe and Mail, Global News, and you have the NSICOP Commission that is supposedly reviewing all this intelligence. They're saying there are 11 parliamentarians, past or present, that have wittingly collaborated with foreign states. And then you have the Hogue Commission coming in and saying, nothing to see here. How do you square that?
Pretty much, and I just have a lot of insight into the reporting, of course, which started with me and global, I'll come out and say, due to the Prime Minister's office denialism and lies, global ran into reporting challenges. And what do you know? Then some people apparently start going to the Globe and Mail, Canada's paper record. They started with Canada's subject matter expert, a single journalist who wrote the book on this, and it then goes to a powerfully connected journalist named Bob Fife. Powerfully connected to the Prime Minister's office too, as well, which is another story. But yeah, I can tell Canadians, look, the NSI COP report is the report they should be following. The Hogue Commission, I'll give you a data point. We spoke about Minister marrying. My sources, or most important source, indicated very important. The staff member for marrying was taking private meetings, allegedly, with the Chinese intelligence hidden operative Wei Zhao, who was, involved in the research, Chinese consulate, research attacks on MP Michael Chan and his family in Hong Kong. He's what they call PNG'd, persona non grata, only after media exposure. Stories I knew, but the Globe and Mail, for whatever reason, was the one that could report. But what they didn't report, and what I had to report at the Bureau, my new startup, was marrying staff allegedly meeting privately with Wei Zhao, marrying staff blocking, having some involvement in Marrying's meetings and speeches, allegedly with influence from Chinese intelligence operator Wei Zhao. Marrying's staff allegedly blocking or having some disruptive activity towards, Marrying having any meetings with Taiwanese officials. So why does that matter? There's a case that has been prosecuted, still ongoing, in New York State with a staff member named Linda Sun, who worked for 2 Democratic governors. And the most important aspect of her case is she was tasked to block any involvement from those governors' offices with Taiwanese officials. Meanwhile, getting paid, or her husband getting paid under the table with nice business contracts. So this couple, have homes in Hawaii and, the East Coast and nice cars. And it's just a very complex intelligence operation with a political staffer getting paid through her husband. Classic espionage, classic political interference of the highest level of an important state, New York. And yet, I'm saying, same thing is happening in Canada. A staff member, allegedly, of a minister blocking meetings with Taiwan. Why did that never come out in the Hogue Commission? Was that staff member similarly getting, payments, through a relative or something like that? We'll never know, because the Hogue Commission has covered up so much. There were meetings in third-party countries of various politicians, allegedly involved in clandestine support. Nothing in the Hogue Commission in terms of conclusions. This is why I'm saying Canadians can't trust the Hogue Commission. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, as the subject matter expert who has the most information on this, more than the Globe and Mail, I'm saying, and other former CSIS officers agree with me, it's a whitewash. And maybe there was some intention to give Canadians a sense of assurance that, yes, some bad stuff happened, but no politicians, knowingly were involved in espionage or influence. So you can trust this next election. We still have a functioning state. Meanwhile, as I say, Hurricane Donald is sort of saying you don't have a functioning state or a functioning military. So we're in I don't know, I never thought I wasn't educated as a Canadian, in the highest level schools in this country to ever believe my state would be in this position, but here we are. It's just it's hard. It's hard to process.
So we're at a point, we're at probably one of the most pivotal points in our country's history where Canadians need to decide, are we going to accept this any longer? And in speaking with CSIS and speaking with military officials, the message seems to be the same from both of them, is that we need Canadians to take an active role in national security, and we need Canadians to take an active role at every level of government, because to your point and to the points of everybody that we've talked to, this isn't just at the federal level, it's at all levels of government all around the country.
Yeah.
And we need to be demanding that our officials in every election, every candidate, make national security a priority for a change. And we need a government with courage that's going to be willing to make decisions that some people will brand as racist, that some people will brand as politically dangerous. They need to make the courageous decisions so we can get back a country that Canadians have confidence again. Because if they don't, then we are going to be just continuing to erode our fabric of democracy, our economy, and I don't think any of us want to see where that leads.
I agree. I mean, I do think the world needs Canada, but the world needs Canada with a military that's prepared to use force to defend itself, because we cannot survive, in an increasingly dangerous world if we can't pull our weight. That's been made painfully clear in the past months, right? Mm-hmm. We were free riding for way too long, and how does that work? Politicians free ride so they can hand out various goodies, and I'm not getting into the debate about conservatism or socialism.
Right.
Look, we just need to have a practical, smart, logical, common sense approach that you do need the elements of force. You do need the elements of having a functioning police force, functioning laws, that if there's corruption of any type politically, you can crack down on it. That people are not going to be, because they're a lawyer or a politician, have a veil around them where they can do pretty much anything they want, which is where we are right now. And so, yeah, I do it. We shouldn't be the 51st state, but if we can't carry our weight, it's better than being a silent proxy for China. So I do think we're in that crucial point where, yeah, if you're a Canadian patriot, you need to look at your history, what you were taught, a lot of things you took for granted, and say, yeah, with my next vote, I'm going to decide who's going to support us being a state that has great institutions. And again, force is a part of that. Freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free.
Well, and anyone who purports to be a proud Canadian, it's time to stand up for Canada. So, well, I think there is hope. I think there is desire in the country for change, but Canadians need to understand that they're not alone in this perception of Canada, that it's not what it once was. There's millions of Canadians around that feel the same way. They just need to get engaged and link up with other people like that and get involved in your elections. Run in the next election, whether it's trustee, whether it's a councillor, whether it's an MPP or MLA, whatever it is. That's the only way this is going to change. But it starts with this next election, and it is not too late to let your MPs, your candidates, know that you expect a Canada that runs without foreign interference. You expect a government that abhors corruption, that roots out corruption, and that is not afraid to expose corruption by laying it out on the table, no matter what party it is.
Yeah, without fear or favor. And I'm called back to your point about, in response to such disgust with the current sitting government, people were treating it as a joke. Let's elect the worst candidate. But
right.
I think that's a teachable point and a great look. This is not a joke, what's happening in Canada. And by the same token, all this misinformation in social media, like this is a chance. I'm leaning on my upbringing now that when you're in crisis, dig into the goodness in yourself and your neighbor. And, because a lot of bad forces could push people to just treat your fellow citizens as if they're not as good as you. And Canada should be better than that. And we can be, but it's such a crucial moment. And I really like the way you put it that, yeah, it's not a joke the way we treat our democracy or our fellow citizens.
Well, time will tell, and we'll see what happens after the next election. Sam, thank you for being with us on Northern Perspective today.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks.